A German shepherd stumbled out of the murky floodwaters, her body drenched, her ribs jutting beneath a coat matted with mud and old scars. Survival was never meant for her. Yet, in the drowned streets of Maragold Bend, where houses floated like broken rafts and voices begging for help were lost to the river's pull, a group of U.S. Marines pressed on, determined to save as many lives as the storm had not yet claimed. No one thought the dog mattered. No one believed she would last the night. But she carried something with her, a secret, and a reminder of what it meant to be rescued. What followed would bring tears, and faith that even in the bleakest storm, second chances are possible. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. Share your country in the comments. And if you stand by the belief that neither people nor animals should be abandoned in disaster, hit that subscribe button, because this story may just renew your trust in miracles. The storm had not arrived with the fury of winds tearing roofs apart. Instead, it crept in slowly, drowning everything in its path with relentless, rising water. Maragold Bend, a modest city along the Louisiana bayou, lay beneath a sky the color of iron. Thunder rolled lazily, never breaking free, while curtains of rain fell without mercy for days. Levees strained, rivers broke their borders, and by late afternoon the streets had become canals, neighborhoods scattered like islands in a new sea. Roofs stuck out like the backs of drowned animals, while the current carried propane tanks, broken furniture, and fragments of shattered lives. The air reeked of mud and gasoline. The silence was punctured only by the steady percussion of rain and the groan of houses collapsing into the flood. Amid the chaos moved a squad of Marines, their rigid discipline softened by the cries of families with nowhere else to flee. Captain Jack Rohr stood at the helm of the rescue boat, steering with the precision of a man who had spent much of his life commanding under pressure. At 37, he was tall and broad-shouldered, with the athletic frame of one accustomed to years of runs at dawn and grueling deployments. His close-cut dark hair, streaked faintly with early gray at the temples, clung damp beneath his helmet. Pale green eyes revealed the burden of deserts crossed, jungles endured, and memories that never let go. Calm was his shield. He rarely raised his voice, never indulged panic, and though his words were spare, they carried weight enough to make chaos feel survivable. Yet silence haunted him when duty ended. 2 years earlier, he had lost his younger brother during a hurricane rescue gone wrong. Since then, every mission carried with it a search for redemption. Beside him stood Gunnery Sergeant Alejandro Rio Rivera, early 40s, wiry and compact, his skin bronzed by countless operations beneath unrelenting suns. His black hair was cropped close, his expression seldom softened except when humor briefly slipped through. Rio had grown up in San Antonio, the son of a firefighter, and he carried himself with the same grounded resolve: speak little, act more. He was the squad's iron keel, the man who transformed Jack's orders into action with crisp efficiency. Beneath his stern exterior, however, lingered a dry, mischievous wit. In quiet moments, one sarcastic remark could dissolve tension. And in storms, he anchored young Marines with nothing more than a steady hand on the shoulder. On the bow sat Hospital Corpsman Benji Carter, 29, a Navy medic attached to their unit. Lean and narrow-shouldered, with sandy blonde hair that never stayed tied, his freckled face looked almost boyish. Bright hazel eyes shimmered with restless energy. Behind his easy grin, though, lay an unyielding commitment to mend every wound. Raised by a single mother who worked nights as a nurse, Benji had long ago learned how to balance compassion with endurance. In the field, he often lightened fear with humor, handing out candy from Murray's to coax children into letting him check their pulse, cracking jokes while he wrapped wounds. He was the squad's heart, always reminding them that behind every mission were lives. Near the engine crouched Corporal Avery Brooks, 25, lean and long-limbed, his pale skin a reminder of years spent indoors repairing vehicles before requesting frontline duty. His short brown hair stuck up in uneven tufts beneath his helmet, while gray eyes studied everything quietly. The middle child of a noisy Ohio family, Avery had survived by retreating into silence. A voracious reader, he asked sharp, precise questions, absorbing details others missed. If Rio was the keel, Avery was the compass, steady, cautious, mapping patterns where others saw only disorder. At the stern, gripping the tiller with youthful eagerness, stood Lance Corporal Noah Flint. Barely 22, with the build of a farmhand, his blonde hair damp with sweat beneath his helmet, Noah's blue eyes were wide and earnest. His broad jaw carried the stubborn streak that had driven him into scrapes as a teenager in Iowa. He joined the Marines after a flood destroyed his father's farm, determined never again to watch water take everything. Each mission, to him, was an adventure, but beneath that eagerness burned a deep need to prove he belonged among hardened men. Together, the five formed a strange flotilla against the drowned city, their rubber craft gliding past half-submerged mailboxes and drifting trash bins. Since dawn, they had been pulling families from second-story windows and collapsing porches. Their uniforms were soaked, their voices hoarse, but their vigilance held steady. Rain hammered against their helmets, thunder rolled, and every flooded street seemed to hold both danger and desperate eyes. It was then, as they entered a narrow stretch where water lapped nearly to the rooftops, that Jack raised his hand. "Kill the motor," he ordered quietly. Noah eased back the throttle, the engine coughing into silence. Only rain remained, and the groan of drowning timber. Then it came, a faint, high-pitched whimper. It wavered through the storm like a plea. Once, then again, thinner but full of pain. Jack gestured. Benji leaned forward, listening with a medic's sharp ear. "That's not human," he whispered. "That's a dog." They followed the sound, guiding the boat past a half-sunken sedan until they reached the porch of a shotgun house sagging under the flood. Its paint peeled, its windows black. Tied to the iron railing with a frayed rope, half-submerged in brown water, was a German shepherd. Her sable coat was streaked with mud and oil, her sides heaving. Her belly bulged with pregnancy. Rope had cut raw into her hind leg, leaving scars. She lifted her head weakly, amber eyes meeting them, not fierce, but pleading. She was perhaps 4 or 5 years old, her body gaunt with neglect. Yet beneath the grime, her proud lines showed traces of a once magnificent animal. Jack's chest tightened. "Cut her loose," he said, already moving. The Marine steadied the boat as he stepped onto the slick porch. Rain beat against him as he drew his knife and sliced the rope. The dog sagged forward, too weak to resist, her breath ragged. Jack pulled a silver emergency blanket from his pack, wrapped her carefully, and lifted her as if she were a child. She was lighter than expected, bones sharp under her sodden coat. He carried her back to the boat, jaw set. "Delta," Jack murmured, the name falling instinctively from his lips. "We'll call her Delta." The Marines nodded. Names mattered in moments like these. The floodwaters showed no mercy as the Marines steered their boat toward the makeshift refuge. The high school gymnasium, once a place of pep rallies and basketball games, had been transformed into a reluctant ark. Water lapped hungrily at its steps, as if the swollen river intended to swallow even this last haven. Inside, the polished wood floors were cluttered with cots, stacks of bottled water, and families huddled beneath Red Cross blankets. The air smelled of damp clothes, disinfectant, and the sharp tang of fear. Outside, the storm pounded steadily, gusts rattling the glass doors like fists. Captain Jack Rohr carried Delta in his arms as he stepped into the gym. The German shepherd, still swaddled in her silver blanket, stirred faintly but did not resist. Children tightened their grip on worn stuffed animals as the Marines entered. Adults stopped whispering mid-sentence, their eyes following the uniformed men with equal parts relief and unease. Their presence meant strength, but also that the danger was still very real. Jack's face was unreadable, jaw taut, his damp helmet tucked under one arm. He made his way to a cleared space near the back wall where a woman in a long raincoat was already moving with swift precision. Dr. Taran Oakland had been working tirelessly since the first flood siren. 39 years old, she was of medium height with a wiry build, her movements quick and efficient. Her dark hair was pulled into a bun streaked faintly with gray, her oval face defined by sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. Slim hands, steady even under exhaustion, spoke of years in veterinary medicine. Yet her urgency came from something deeper. She had lost her father, also a veterinarian, when Hurricane Katrina swept away their family clinic years ago. Since then, she had answered every disaster call she could reach, believing that animals deserved advocates as fiercely as people did. People often called her brisk, but those who looked closely saw the softness in her gaze whenever it landed on a suffering creature. Jack knelt, laying Delta carefully at her feet. Pregnant, dehydrated, rope burns, hind leg injury, he reported, his tone flat, almost clinical. Taran crouched at once, her knees creaking against the hardwood as she brushed mud and fur aside to inspect the dog's ribs. "She's desperate for water and rest," she muttered. And whoever tied her like this didn't simply forget. She was abandoned. With gentle fingers, she pressed along Delta's swollen belly. "She'll deliver soon." Delta's breath came in shudders, yet her amber eyes never strayed from Jack's face. Even broken and exhausted, she seemed anchored to the one who had cut her free. Around them, whispers swelled like another tide. "I saw another shepherd tied out near the bridge," a man in a denim jacket muttered. "My cousin says people are scooping up purebreds and hauling them off in boats," a woman with a baby whispered. The rumors spread quickly, talk of dog rings, traffickers, cages hidden in the flood. Fear twisted with suspicion, and in the damp air, every word carried weight. The Marines, however, found their places among the evacuees, each slipping into a role. Benji Carter dropped his soaked pack and opened it wide, pulling chocolate squares from an MRE. With his trademark grin, he offered them to trembling children. "Doctor's orders," he said, his tone light. Their brittle laughter broke through the heavy silence, and even their parents managed faint smiles. Benji strung towels near a heater, coaxing families to let shivering pets curl against the warmth. His hands moved briskly but gently, creating comfort out of scraps. Corporal Avery Brooks sat cross-legged beside a pale, thin girl no older than 14. She hugged her knees tightly, her face streaked with tears that had dried into salt. Her hair, pale brown and damp, stuck to her cheeks, and her eyes, though rimmed red, remained steady. Her name was June Miles. She had arrived with her aunt after her home was consumed by floodwater. Avery's quiet voice asked if she was all right. "My dog, Scout. He's my shepherd," she whispered. "He was outside when the water came." Her voice cracked, but her chin lifted with stubborn resolve. June had already endured the loss of her mother 2 years before. Scout had been her one constant, her closest companion. Avery fumbled, words never his strong suit, and instead reached into his ration pouch. He held out a strip of smoked meat. "For luck," he offered simply. June managed a faint, grateful smile, clutching the strip as though it were a talisman. Avery felt something stir inside him, realizing that sometimes the smallest gestures mattered most. At the far wall, Lance Corporal Noah Flint crouched with a frown of concentration. He had noticed an outlet sparking dangerously near the stage, its cords soaked from leaks. With his multi-tool, he stripped wires and rewired the socket until, with a triumphant grin, the fan and heater sputtered to life. "Dry blankets now," he called, his boyish cheer infectious. Parents nodded in thanks, and for a moment, the storm's grip felt weaker. But the storm had its reminders. Night deepened, and the rain hammered relentlessly at the gym roof. Families slept uneasily, shadows curled under thin blankets. Jack remained with Delta near the back wall, his helmet set aside, hair dripping as he watched Taran prepare a small bowl of water. Rio paced the perimeter, scanning exits, jaw locked against memories of past floods. The whispers about missing dogs did not fade, they sharpened. "They're making money off this," a man insisted. "They're not lost, they're being taken." Then, without warning, the gym's lights flickered twice, and died. Gasps filled the cavernous space, children cried, adults murmured in fear. Darkness swallowed the gym, broken only by flashlight beams darting across frightened faces and water pooling at the doors. The storm had knocked out the generator. In the tense silence that followed, a low groan rose from Delta. Her body shifted, her sides contracting. Jack dropped to her side, hands steady on her flank. Taran lifted her flashlight beam, narrowing her eyes. "She's in labor," she whispered. Around them, fear buzzed, but the Marine's world narrowed to a single trembling creature. In the middle of flood and fear, the dog they had dragged from death was preparing to bring life. The storm's rhythm pounded against the gym roof, a steady roar that blurred into background noise. Families dozed uneasily in the dark, their shapes huddled beneath blankets while flashlights jittered like fireflies. For the Marines, however, all attention had focused on Delta. Her body trembled, contractions rippling through her sides. Jack knelt close, rubbing her damp flank with a folded emergency blanket warmed between his palms. His pale green eyes, usually guarded, softened as she pressed her muzzle weakly against his wrist. In that moment, silence became more than armor, it became connection. Taran Oakland worked with quiet urgency, arranging towels across a plastic sheet and setting lanterns for light. Her slim fingers moved with practiced strength, coaxing life as she had in storm shelters before. "She's ready," she murmured. "Stay calm. She'll need us steady." Rio crouched nearby, his wiry frame casting a long shadow in the lantern's glow. His voice was low and even, like a metronome. "Steady in, steady out. She's strong. Keep her steady." His calm cadence grounded the room, familiar to Marines who had drilled under harsher conditions. Avery Brooks hunched over his notebook, pencil scratching across damp pages. Times, contractions, temperature, he recorded every detail like a clerk in a drowned court, capturing testimony no one else wanted to bear witness to. Numbers gave him order when the world offered none. June Miles edged forward, clutching a small blue collar with a rusted tag, the last trace of her lost shepherd, Scout. Her thin frame shook beneath an oversized coat, but her eyes were fierce with determination. She knelt and placed the collar carefully among the towels. "So she knows she isn't alone," she whispered. Jack gave her the faintest nod, and her lips twitched with a fragile smile. Benji Carter clapped his hands once, trying to lighten the air. "All right, girl," he told Delta with mock authority. "We're doing this Marine style. 1, 2, 3, push." His boyish grin and playful cadence drew chuckles from his squad, even from evacuees peeking nervously nearby. Taran's serious mouth curved ever so slightly, though her eyes never left her patient. At last, close to 2 in the morning, a cry pierced the humid air, a tiny, wet whimper. Taran caught the slick body, briskly rubbing it until a fragile chest shuddered and breath rushed in. She set the pup against Delta's belly. Delta, though weak, licked fiercely, eyes glazed but unyielding. Then came another. And another. By the fourth, even exhausted families had stirred, their faces softening as each new voice broke the storm's hold. When the fifth pup arrived, the entire gym seemed to breathe easier. For hours it had been heavy with fear, now, for the first time, warmth returned. Jack sat cross-legged, gently drying the last pup. Though rain still dripped from his hair, his face was damp with more than water. Rio's steady count had long ended, yet he remained crouched like a sentinel. Avery continued his litany of notes, pencil smudging as he captured each weight in time. June brushed her collar with trembling fingers, whispering Scout's name under her breath as if the newborns might carry him back. Benji flopped dramatically onto the floor, arms spread wide. 5, he announced, grinning. "That's a squad all on their own." Laughter rippled through Marines and civilians alike. For a heartbeat, the gym felt less like a shelter and more like a barracks alive with camaraderie. But not all eyes were friendly. Avery straightened suddenly, gray eyes narrowed. At the far corner, near the emergency exit, he saw fresh mud streaks across the floor. He rose carefully, long frame moving with quiet precision. Near the door, footprints lingered, larger than his own, still wet, leading inside but not back out. The handle glistened, slick with rain from outside. Whoever it was had been watching, then slipped into the storm. He returned to the group, voice low as he leaned toward Jack. Someone was here. Jack's expression did not shift, but his hand instinctively rested on Delta's side. Outside, the storm raged on, darkness pressing close around the fragile bubble of warmth inside the gym. Morning broke reluctantly, the sky still gray and heavy, rain falling in weary sheets. The gym buzzed with subdued energy, the cries of Delta's pups mingling with restless voices of survivors. The Marines, their rest brief, gathered around a makeshift operations table, a plank on cinder blocks cluttered with maps and damp notes. At dawn, Sheriff Elia Donnelly arrived. Tall, broad-shouldered, with brown hair streaked with silver braided down her back, she carried herself with quiet authority. Known throughout Maragold Bend as strict but fair, her hazel eyes met Jack's with wary recognition. Both were leaders accustomed to carrying weight alone. Behind her came Animal Services, led by Officer Dean Walters, a lean man in his 50s with wire-frame glasses and thinning hair. A former teacher turned welfare officer after losing his own rescue dog in a flood, he walked with careful, deliberate steps. Volunteers followed with crates, leashes, and first aid kits. Fire crews entered as well, led by Captain Royce Hanley, a bearded man built like an oak, slapping Jack's shoulder with the camaraderie of one who had fought both fire and flood. Locals joined too, the St. John Navy, volunteers in patched boats and rain gear, among them Sarah Lebro, a wiry woman in her 30s with calloused hands and sharp eyes, who had made it her mission to fight every storm since losing her family home years before. Last came Bo Riggins. 70, stooped but steady, his white beard dripping rain, he carried a bundle wrapped in oilskin. A fisherman by trade, but once a federal game warden, Bo's eyes remained sharp and gray-blue, measuring every man before he spoke. His career had ended in bitterness when a trafficker slipped free of prosecution, but he had never stopped watching the waters. He laid the oilskin bundle on the table and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a cracked leather tube, holding a rolled map yellowed with age. He smoothed it with weathered hands. Federal issue, he muttered. Mapped every landing and back channel smugglers ever used. Thought it was rotted away. Guess not. The Marines leaned over as Bo pointed out marks, old wharves, hidden culverts, forgotten canneries. Avery compared them with the spray-painted numbers he had sketched from cages earlier. His gray eyes widened. It matches. Same drop points. Bo grunted. Old tricks never die. Just change hands. Jack's jaw tightened as he traced one of the marks. We cut them off here, he said firmly. Sheriff Donnelly nodded. You take the water. We'll block the levee. By dusk, the Marines and Bo Riggins slipped their boat back into the drowned streets. The rain had thinned to mist, but fog rolled heavy, every corner a shadowed mouth. Abandoned storefronts drifted past, mannequins floating like corpses in shattered windows. The canals widened as they reached the industrial quarter, once home to seafood packers and warehouses, now reeking of oil and bleach. Bo raised his calloused hand, pointing toward a crumbling building. Shrimp Cannery. Shut down 5 years ago. Bad debts. But look at them tracks. Sure enough, grooves scarred the concrete ramp leading from the water to the loading bay, as if heavy cages had been dragged up. A sharp smell of disinfectant stung their noses, too clean for this place of rot. Jack crouched, brushing his glove against faded red spray paint. Numbers. Not random. Noah lifted his camera, recording. Code system, he muttered. His voice, usually light, carried a harder edge. Avery copied the symbols quickly into his notebook, while Rio unfolded a waterproof map, sketching the waterways with calm precision. This isn't random dumping, Rio said. It's a route. They know where to land, where to hide. Benji suddenly froze, catching shouts from a half-flooded house nearby. Without hesitation, he leapt from the boat, water rushing to his thighs. Inside, an elderly couple frantically bailed with pots as the current tore through their wall. Benji sprinted back for the portable pump. "Cover me," he called, his grin tight with determination. He crouched in the doorway, rigging the pump and teaching them how to keep the intake clear. "Buy you a few hours, long enough for evacuation." Their nods of gratitude were enough as he jogged back to the squad, dripping but smiling. At the Cannery's loading bay, the smell of bleach was strongest. A broken lock hung from the doors. Inside, the cavernous floor bore deep scratches, puddles of disinfectant mixed with floodwater. Rio crouched, running a finger through residue. "They're cleaning up after themselves. Not amateurs." Then Bo stiffened. "Motor," he whispered. Through the fog came the low hum of an engine. Lights flickered, growing. A flatboat approached fast. "Down," Jack hissed. They shoved their craft against the shelter of a collapsed billboard, crouching low as a mounted spotlight swept the water. It skimmed across the cannery wall, lingered, then swung outward. Two silhouettes stood aboard, voices muffled but urgent. One cursed about running late, the other laughed harshly. The spotlight drifted closer, cutting across the Marine's hiding place. Jack's hand pressed firm against the boat's edge. The beam paused, then passed. The flatboat surged into the fog, its engine growling. For a breathless moment, no one moved. Then the current shifted, slamming their boat against the billboard's rusted legs. Wood groaned. Avery stumbled, but Rio caught him by the collar. Jack braced, boots slipping, while Noah jammed the engine in reverse just enough to counter the pull. The boat rocked violently, then steadied, slipping free of the eddy. Silence stretched. Finally, Jack exhaled. "Not random," he said grimly. "This is organized. Right under our noses." At his feet, Delta stirred, a faint growl rumbling from her chest. Exhausted yet alert, her amber eyes locked in the direction the flatboat had gone. Jack's hand brushed her damp fur, and for the first time he felt she was not merely surviving, she was leading. The Marines returned to the high school gym well past midnight, fog still clinging to the water like breath on glass. Their boots dripped as they entered, their uniforms heavy with damp. Families stirred at the sound, flashlights cutting brief arcs through the cavernous room. The air was thick with sweat, mildew, and the sharp tang of disinfectant, but here, at least, people felt the fragile comfort of safety. Jack carried Delta in his arms. Though her body shook with exhaustion, her belly swollen, her amber eyes tracked everything around her. Dr. Taran Oakland had not slept. She rose the instant they entered, her raincoat dripping onto the floor, glasses slipping down her nose. She crouched at once beside Delta. "She's ready," Taran said tightly. "Clear space. Keep her warm." Her hands moved fast, spreading towels across plastic sheeting, setting lanterns where light could cut through the shadows. Every motion was practiced, steady, a rhythm she had lived through in shelters before. Jack knelt beside Delta, pulling another emergency blanket from his pack. He rubbed it between his palms to warm it, then draped it across her trembling sides. His pale eyes softened as Delta pressed her muzzle against his wrist, as if to say she trusted him to see her through. Rio crouched close, voice calm and precise. "Steady breathing. In and out. She's strong." His cadence, low and even, worked like a drill instructor's rhythm, grounding the Marines, anchoring fear with familiarity. Avery hunched over his notebook, documenting everything, contractions, temperature, time. Pencil scratched across damp paper as if numbers could bring order to a storm. His gray eyes never wavered from the task, even as sweat beaded at his temple. June Miles edged forward, clutching Scout's old collar. She knelt near Delta's nest and laid the collar gently among the towels. "So she knows she isn't alone," she whispered, her thin shoulders stiff with defiance. Jack gave her a subtle nod, and for a moment she seemed older than her years. Benji Carter hovered near, his freckled face lit with nervous energy. He clapped his hands together once. "Okay, girl," he told Delta with a grin. "We're doing this marine style. 1, 2, 3, push." His exaggerated cadence sparked chuckles from the squad, even from evacuees nearby. Taran's stern mouth softened for just a heartbeat. Then it happened. The first cry came close to 2 in the morning, a thin, sharp whimper that cut through the storm. Taran caught the small, slick body, rubbing briskly until its chest fluttered, then placed it against Delta's belly. Weak but determined, Delta licked fiercely, welcoming life into chaos. Then came the second. Then the third. By the time the fourth arrived, families were awake, watching silently. Faces softened, shoulders eased. When the fifth pup entered the world, the heavy air inside the gym shifted. Fear gave way to awe. Jack sat cross-legged, rubbing down the last pup with a towel. Rainwater dripped from his hair, but the dampness on his face was more than the storm. Rio remained a shadow beside them, vigilant. Avery continued his careful log, numbers written like scripture. June brushed the blue collar with trembling fingers, whispering Scout's name as though hope might return through these new cries. Benji sprawled onto the floor with mock exhaustion. 5, he announced loudly. That's a squad in itself. His boyish grin coaxed laughter through the shelter, breaking fear's grip. For the first time in days, warmth filled the gym. Families who had lost everything smiled through tears. An old woman kissed her rosary, whispering prayers of thanks. A boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, asking if the puppies would play when they grew. But Avery's gray eyes narrowed. Something was wrong. Near the far exit, streaks of mud stained the floor. He rose quietly, tracing the marks with cautious steps. Footprints, large, still wet. They led inside, but not out. The door handle was slick with rain. Someone had been here, watching. He returned silently, leaning toward Jack. "We weren't alone," he murmured. Jack's expression stayed firm, but his hand instinctively rested on Delta's side. The following day, the gym swelled with new urgency. Rumors hardened into conviction, boats moving cages through the canals at night. Fear etched into people's faces told Jack all he needed to know. This wasn't chance. It was organized. Bo Riggins returned, his oilskin hat dripping, his eyes sharp despite his years. He stood before Jack with gravel in his voice. "Not just talk, Captain. I saw them myself. Flatboats passed the Cannery last night. No lights. Moving fast. Cages don't slide like that unless someone's pushing hard. If you want proof, I'll take you." Jack studied him, weighing the man's weathered bearing, then nodded once. "We go tonight." By dusk, the Marines and Bo slipped out again, their boat gliding through drowned streets. Fog clung low, the city's silence broken only by the slap of water against concrete. They passed storefronts with shattered windows, mannequins bobbing lifelessly, until they reached the industrial quarter. The air reeked of bleach and rot. Bo lifted his hand. "Cannery," he muttered. Fresh drag marks scarred the ramp leading to the loading bay. Numbers sprayed in red paint marked the walls. The stench of disinfectant lingered too strong, too deliberate. Then, through the fog, the hum of an engine. "Down," Jack ordered sharply. They shoved their boat into the lee of a collapsed billboard, crouching low. A flatboat glided past, its spotlight sweeping wide. 2 silhouettes stood aboard, voices carrying, complaints about being late, harsh laughter. The beams skimmed the water dangerously close, then shifted away. Only when the sound of the engine faded did the squad breathe again. Jack's jaw clenched. "This is organized," he said. At his feet, Delta growled low, her eyes still sharp despite exhaustion. She was no longer just surviving. She was pointing the way. The raid came the next night. Rain lashed sideways across Maragold Bend as the Marines, Sheriff Donnelly's deputies, fire crews, and Bo Riggins closed in on the rusted shipyard. Abandoned barges tilted like broken ribs against the docks. Floodlights swung, cutting across the water. From the Marine's boat, Jack crouched low, eyes fixed on silhouettes hauling cages onto a barge. Dogs whimpered from inside, their cries carrying across the bayou. "That's them," he muttered. Rio steered steadily, voice hard. "We hold until Riggins blocks the run." Across the channel, Bo's battered trawler chugged stubbornly, planting itself in the trafficker's escape path. On shore, Sheriff Donnelly signaled her deputies into position. Benji coaxed life from a portable generator, its floodlights flaring to reveal dozens of cages stacked inside the warehouse. Dogs whimpered and barked, a chorus of desperation. The Marines stormed the warehouse. Noah scanned frantically with his handheld chip reader. Avery scribbled numbers and codes, comparing them to Bo's map. Then his eyes froze. "Jack," he whispered, pointing. In a corner cage lay an older German shepherd, her muzzle gray, her eyes clouded but fierce. On her flank, beneath patchy fur, a faded tattoo, an old K9 mark. Delta pressed forward, whining low. Her eyes locked with the elder shepherd's, recognition passing between them like lightning. Jack's chest tightened. He didn't know if this was her partner, her kin, or simply a kindred spirit, but the bond was undeniable. Suddenly, shouting erupted. A broad man stormed in, scarred cheeks shining with rain, steel pipe raised in his hand. He slammed it against cages, sparks flying. Dogs yelped. "You think you can take this from us?" he roared. Jack stepped forward, but Delta moved first. She surged to her feet, muscles taut despite fatigue. Barking sharp and controlled, she circled, cutting the man's path. When he lunged, she struck, jaws clamping his forearm, not to maul, but to halt. The pipe clattered to the floor as he stumbled. Deputies swarmed, slamming him into the wall, snapping cuffs on his wrists. Delta released, chest heaving. She had not attacked wildly. She had executed control, as if training still guided her. Jack knelt, stroking her sodden fur. "Good girl," he whispered. "Perfect control." But chaos wasn't finished. The barge strained against its anchor chain, the current pulling it toward escape. Bo's trawler groaned under the strain. Jack and Rio exchanged a look, then leapt into the freezing water. Diesel stung their throats, current slamming them sideways. Jack grappled the anchor chain, muscles burning as it slipped in his bleeding hands. Rio fought beside him, shouting through spray. The chain wrenched free, the barge grinding forward, until a dark shape cut through the water. Delta. She plunged from the dock, teeth sinking into Jack's sleeve, pulling upward with everything she had left. Jack regained footing, he and Rio forcing the chain around a piling, locking it in place. The barge shuddered, trapped. On shore, Noah and Avery forced open a locked cabinet. Inside, huddled and trembling, was a tiny German shepherd pup, no more than 6 weeks old. A scrap of blanket clung to his side, the same fabric Delta had been wrapped in when Jack first found her. Avery's voice cracked. "Jack, it's hers. Her pup." Jack lifted the trembling bundle and set it at Delta's paws. She sniffed him, whimpered low, then licked his head with a mother's certainty. The pup buried his face in her chest. For a moment, the storm, the shipyard, the chaos, all faded. What remained was reunion. Morning broke gray and heavy, the rain falling in tired sheets across Maragold Bend. The storm's fury had eased, but its scars remained. Streets reeked of fuel and river silt, houses leaned half-collapsed, and mudlines marked porches like rings of defeat. Yet in the ruin, a new heartbeat stirred. By the old ferry dock, its timbers warped but still upright, the Marines and townsfolk began to raise something the flood had not taken, a sanctuary. They called it Harbor Haven. The name had first slipped from Jack's lips, spoken almost idly, and was quickly picked up by others until it rooted itself as if it had always belonged. The ferry's abandoned waiting shed became the hub. Benches were cleared aside to make room for crates lined with donated blankets. Fire crews rigged portable heaters, humming like stubborn engines, blowing warmth across damp planks. Volunteers laid tarps, straw, and mats, transforming the once bleak space into a row of kennels. Floodlights swung from poles powered by Benji's temperamental generator, Betsy, casting steady beams through drizzle. Dogs once crammed into rusted cages now stood in clean stalls, their cries softening into sighs. The sound was different here, not desperation, but release. Dr. Taran Oakland moved constantly, her glasses fogging, her ponytail damp with mist. She bent to check ears and paws, pressing gently along ribs, her hand scribbling notes into a fresh ledger made from salvaged school paper. On the cover she had scrawled in firm block letters, Harbor Haven Health Log. Each dog received an entry, weight, condition, microchip if found. Her neat handwriting marched evenly, even when fatigue shook her fingers. If they have records, they have futures, she told Jack firmly. Without them, they disappear again. Rio, never one to stand idle, crouched with a group of children in the muddy yard. He demonstrated hand signals, palm raised, fingers down, a soft whistle. Nervous dogs hesitated, then slowly obeyed, sitting or waiting as instructed. His calm tone worked where force could not. Confidence comes with structure, he said quietly. When a scarred shepherd mix sat for the first time, children clapped. Rio's stern face softened, though he quickly turned back to discipline, hiding his warmth and precision. Bo Riggins arrived with a bundle of old netting, its strands salt-stained and ragged. Stooping low, he stretched it across poles scavenged from the ferry railing. Not much, he muttered, but it'll keep the rain off. Once tightened, the net became a makeshift canopy. Beneath it, dogs paced freely, their paws no longer sinking into mud. Bo's gnarled hands worked with the pride of a man who had weathered storms all his life. By midday, the dock hummed with more than barking. Neighbors arrived in ponchos, arms burdened with kibble, towels, and crates. Volunteers lined up, names scribbled on damp notepads, eager to clean kennels, fill bowls, or simply sit with the animals. Federal agents from USDA-AIS arrived as well, jackets marked with official patches. Miriam Cole, a short woman in her 50s with curly gray hair, moved briskly with clipboard in hand, her sharp nose sniffing out every missing document. Years earlier she had lost her family's farm dog to a botched quarantine, and ever since she demanded ironclad records. Paperwork is protection, she said firmly. Jack, often skeptical of red tape, found himself quietly grateful. News crews appeared, their cameras wrapped in plastic bags, recording Marines kneeling beside kennels, children feeding scraps to trembling dogs. Local radio picked up the phrase Harbor Haven and carried it across neighboring parishes still underwater. For a moment, the town that had felt abandoned found purpose again. Then, in the drizzle of late afternoon, a cry rang out that silenced everything. June Miles stumbled forward as a crate was opened. Out bounded a shaggy German shepherd, matted fur dripping, tail thumping wildly. Around his neck clung a small blue collar, the rusted tag still attached. "Scout," June whispered, her voice breaking. The dog launched into her arms, nearly knocking her flat. She buried her face into his wet fur, sobbing with relief. Scout whined and licked her cheek, pressing close as if afraid she might vanish. Around them, Marines and townsfolk paused, eyes damp, hearts stirred. Rain beat harder on the dock roof, but beneath it rang the sound of reunion, a girl and her lost companion restored. Jack turned slightly, blinking against the sting in his eyes. By evening, Harbor Haven glowed beneath strung lanterns, its muddy yard alive with wagging tails and weary smiles. The storm still lingered, but here, beneath patched tarps and rattling floodlights, something stronger than fear had taken root. Harbor Haven grew quickly, almost in defiance of the storm. By the second night, its ferry dock hummed like a small town. Lanterns swung gently in the damp breeze, tarps crackled under the rain, and dogs barked in an uneven chorus, sometimes sharp, sometimes soft, sometimes like laughter. Children returned each afternoon, their small hands feeding kibble through the mesh, their voices coaxing timid shepherds to step forward. Old men whittled scrap wood into name tags, scrawling in paint so each kennel bore an identity: River, Echo, Sarge, Hope. The names gave them dignity. The names made them real. Dr. Taran Oakland barely paused for breath. Her ledger thickened with pages, her pen flying. Vaccines administered, wounds cleaned, diets recorded. She moved with iron discipline, but every so often she paused, palm pressed against a trembling flank, her eyes softening before she turned briskly back to work. The Marines divided duties without words. Rio oversaw training drills, ensuring even the most skittish shepherds began to respond to voice and signal. Benji wrangled volunteers with his easy humor, convincing teenagers to haul feed bags like seasoned privates. Avery kept meticulous records, cross-referencing microchip numbers with Bo Riggins' old smuggler map, searching for patterns. Noah tinkered endlessly, patching holes in kennels, rigging floodlights, and jury-rigging a solar charger to keep their radios alive. Jack stood always at the center, his gaze scanning outward, never letting the line between protection and command blur. But Harbor Haven was not free from shadows. On the third night, while fog hugged the river thick and low, Avery spotted movement near the perimeter. A dark figure crouched by the feed barrels, a flashlight flickering once before being snapped off. Avery, tall and silent, moved like a wraith across the mud. He drew close enough to hear the rasp of a breath. "Hands where I can see them," Avery said flatly, his voice low but sharp. The figure bolted. Avery lunged, mud splashing up his legs. The man sprinted for the dock's edge, boots pounding the planks. Jack and Rio were already moving, their silhouettes cutting fast through the lantern glow. The intruder leapt, but Delta was faster. She surged from the shadows, her bark sharp as gunfire. She intercepted, snapping her jaws just short of flesh, forcing the man to stumble. He fell hard into the mud, arms flailing. In a heartbeat, Jack's boot pinned his shoulder, and Rio snapped cuffs around his wrists. They dragged him beneath the floodlight. He was young, maybe early 20s, his raincoat filthy, his eyes wild with fear. In his pocket, Avery found a folded slip of paper, smudged with water but still legible. Numbers. Drop points. Dates. Bo Riggins leaned on his cane, peering close. "Same code as the map," he muttered grimly. The intruder spat mud. "You don't understand. It's bigger than this place. You can't stop it." His voice cracked with defiance and dread. Jack's eyes narrowed. "Watch us." By dawn, the Jim Turn command post buzzed with urgency. Sheriff Elijah Donnelly spread the wet paper against a table, her braid damp, her hazel eyes hard. "Every one of these numbers matches reported sightings," she said. "We've been missing the pattern because they're moving through forgotten channels. We'll cut them off tonight." Federal agents leaned in, their jackets dark with rain. Miriam Cole tapped the ledger Taran had built. "With this documentation, every animal is accounted for. There will be no vanishing into evidence lockers. These dogs are survivors, not numbers." Noah hunched over his laptop, the screen powered by his rattling solar charger. He pulled up scanned records, his fingers quick on the keys. "Look at this," he said, voice sharp. "Microchips from 3 different kennels, all registered to the same distributor, name scrubbed, but shipping records show identical barge routes. This isn't random theft. It's a network." Avery's pencil tapped his notebook. "Patterns confirm it," he said softly. "East Bank at dusk, Cannery at midnight, shipyard by dawn. Rotating crews, same codes." Jack's jaw set hard. "Then tonight we close it. That night, under a thinning sky, the final confrontation unfolded. The Marines moved with practiced efficiency, their boats skimming low across the current. Sheriff Donnelly's deputies blocked levee access with trucks and spotlights. Bo Riggins guided his trawler into a narrow pass, cutting off retreat. Fire crews manned floodlights that illuminated the abandoned warehouses like a stage. And on the stage, the traffickers appeared, flatboats heavy with cages, men shouting over the engines. For a moment, the scene hung suspended, two sides staring across water. Then the storm broke, not of weather, but of action. Engines roared. Shouts echoed. Flashlights darted like weapons. Jack led his squad onto the dock, Delta at his side. Traffickers bolted, some toward the levee, some dragging cages. Rio intercepted with controlled precision, sweeping two men into the mud. Benji's broad grin masked ferocity as he hauled cages open, freeing panicked dogs. Avery, even in chaos, kept count, shouting numbers above the din to ensure no one was lost. Noah ducked sparks as he pried open a locked shipping container, revealing row upon row of terrified shepherds. And Delta became a storm herself. She darted through chaos, her bark cutting like thunder, driving traffickers back, guiding freed dogs to safety. Twice she intercepted men with makeshift weapons, her control exact, no reckless violence, only measured force. She moved like she had been trained for this very night, as if destiny had returned her to command. The traffickers broke quickly under pressure. Deputies swarmed, cuffs snapped shut, engines sputtered into silence. Floodlights caught every detail, men dragged away, dogs released, cages toppled empty into the mud. In the final container, Jack lifted a trembling pup no larger than his palm. Its fur was damp, its whimper soft. But around its tiny neck clung a scrap of blue fabric, the same as the blanket Delta had been wrapped in when Jack first found her. He carried the pup to her. Delta sniffed, whimpered low, then licked his head with a mother's certainty. Her pup. Her lost one. Returned. The moment silenced everything. Rain pattered, deputies shouted, cages rattled, but in the circle of lantern light, time itself held its breath. Jack crouched, brushing Delta's fur. His voice, rough with exhaustion, carried a reverence he rarely allowed. You brought us here. You led us through. This is your victory. Delta pressed her muzzle into his chest, her pup nestled between them. For the first time since the flood began, Maragold Bend felt not broken but whole. The raid ended not with thunder, but with silence. The floodlights dimmed one by one, their glare softening into lantern glow. Deputies hauled the last of the traffickers away, their boots splashing through the mud. Fire crews doused torches, steam curling in the damp air. What remained were cages, now open, now empty. Dogs padded nervously across the dock, some still trembling, others wagging tails as if freedom itself was a surprise. Volunteers crouched low, coaxing them with soft voices, slipping leashes over shaking necks. The storm's chaos had cracked wide enough to let mercy spill through. By dawn, Harbor Haven pulsed with renewed life. The ferry dock, once nothing more than warped boards and rusted rails, now thrummed with energy. Kennels filled not with despair, but with survivors. Straw was replenished, bowls refilled, blankets traded out for dry ones. The cries were different now, less pleading, more alive. Dr. Taran Oakland moved briskly among them, her raincoat streaked with mud, her glasses slipping down her nose. Her ledger had doubled in pages overnight, each entry a name, a number, a record that meant no creature would vanish again without trace. She paused by Delta's pen, where the shepherd lay curled protectively around her 5 newborns, the lost pup nestled closest. Taran's stern face softened. You've done more than most humans, she murmured. Rio stood near the training yard, his sharp voice guiding volunteers as they built proper runs. He corrected posture, adjusted leashes, demonstrated hand signals. Discipline brings trust, he said, his tone clipped, but when a once skittish shepherd sat calmly at a child's command, his eyes betrayed quiet pride. Benji strung tarps across the yard with his usual grin, cracking jokes as he balanced on crates. "Keep those tails dry, or I'll hear about it all night," he teased, earning chuckles from weary volunteers. His humor held the place together as much as the nails he hammered. Avery hunched over the command table, his pencil moving in steady strokes. He tallied numbers, checked off rescues, and logged microchip registrations. To others, it was clerical. To him, it was proof that none were forgotten. His handwriting was jagged with fatigue, but every mark was precise. Noah, crouched by the dock's edge, patched a broken generator with stubborn focus. Sparks hissed, and then, with a cheer, floodlights flickered back to life. "Still running," he declared proudly. "Just like us." And Jack stood slightly apart, scanning the horizon where the river still ran high, his pale eyes thoughtful. Responsibility weighed on him, but so did pride. He had come into the storm with duty. He would leave it with something else entirely, proof that courage could ripple outward, catching not only soldiers, but whole towns. Word of Harbor Haven spread fast. By the week's end, more boats arrived not with traffickers, but with donations. A church group delivered lumber. A farm family hauled bags of feed. An out-of-state rescue network sent volunteers in yellow ponchos, their van marked with paw prints. Sheriff Elijah Donnelly oversaw it all with quiet authority, her deputies standing post at the dock. "No more cages," she said firmly. "Not here. Not ever again." Federal agents filed their reports, but Miriam Cole lingered longer than most. She sat with Taran at the ledger, combing through records, double-checking details. "If this is to last, it needs more than fences," she said. "It needs permanence." Taran nodded, her eyes already alight with plans. For June Miles, permanence meant something else. Each day, she walked to Harbor Haven, her boots splashing through puddles, Scout bounding at her side. The shepherd, though thin and scarred, moved with new strength, his tail wagging high. June carried herself taller too, the hollow ache in her chest eased by fur and devotion. She had lost her mother to sickness, her home to flood, but not Scout. Not her anchor. Volunteers smiled whenever they passed, whispering that the girl had found her courage again. Delta, too, became more than symbol. Families would stop at her pen, watching the pups squirm, their tiny paws needing straw. Jack often crouched nearby, silent, one hand resting on her flank. Delta trusted him completely, her amber eyes following him wherever he moved. In time, some whispered she might be trained again, not as property, but as partner. One evening, as lanterns flickered against a clearing sky, Bo Riggins leaned against the dock rail. His beard dripped river water, his cane balanced against the boards. He watched Harbor Haven bustle with volunteers and Marines, with children and wagging tails. His gravelly voice was soft when he spoke to Jack. "Storm took plenty from this town. But you brought back something bigger than it stole." Jack didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was written across the dock, laughter where silence had reigned, life where despair had crouched. When orders finally came for the Marines to redeploy, the departure was quiet. No speeches, no ceremony. Just firm handshakes, embraces, and the unspoken understanding that they left Harbor Haven not unfinished, but thriving. As their boat pulled away, Delta barked once from her pen, her pup squirming at her side. Scout barked too, his tail high. June waved, her small figure steady on the dock, the river wind tugging at her coat. Jack lifted his hand in silent salute. The fog was gone, the river clearer now, the storm's rage finally passed. Ahead lay new orders, new battles, but behind, in a battered town on a scarred dock, hope had been anchored. Months passed, and Maragold Bend rose slowly from the wreckage the storm had left behind. Watermarks still scarred houses, and some streets remained broken channels of mud and debris. Yet the spirit of the town shifted. Where once people spoke only of loss, now they spoke of rebuilding, of the ferry dock that had become more than a shelter. Harbor Haven stood as its own kind of monument. What began with tarps and straw matured into something lasting. Volunteers hammered new beams into place, raising roofs over kennels. Donations funded proper fencing, water lines, and a medical wing fashioned from the old ferry office. Murals painted by schoolchildren stretched across the walls, bright paws, wagging tails, blue skies breaking through storm clouds. The sanctuary had become part of the town's lifeblood. Dr. Taran Oakland directed it all with steady hands. Her ledger swelled into a full archive, documenting every intake, every recovery, every adoption. She walked the grounds daily, her rain boots caked in mud, her glasses smudged, her smile quick but real. When people asked how she managed so much, she always answered the same, because they depend on us. And they've earned it. Delta became Harbor Haven's sentinel. She no longer bore the hollow look of an abandoned stray. Her amber eyes burned with steady strength, her body filled out, her gait confident. Beside her, 5 growing pups bounded in clumsy joy, the 6th, her lost one, never leaving her side. Children called them the Harbor Pups. Volunteers whispered that Delta had not only survived the storm, but had become its answer. One by one, other rescues found futures. River, a shy shepherd with scars across his muzzle, went home with an elderly fisherman who spoke softly to him on his boat. Echo, once too afraid to bark, found a place with a family who said her voice filled their silent house. Hope, the runt, was taken in by a teacher who promised to let her visit her old pen whenever she wished. Each adoption was marked on a chalkboard nailed to the dock, a tally that grew each week. Scout, now stronger, wore his blue collar proudly as he trotted beside June. He became more than her companion, he was her protector, her anchor, her proof that love endured past loss. Together they returned each day, June volunteering at the Haven, Scout greeting new arrivals with calm authority. He became, in time, the dock's quiet guardian, second only to Delta. And the Marines, though they were gone, their presence lingered. Stories spread through Maragold Bend of the night soldiers battled traffickers in the rain, of how they cut cages open, of how they carried dogs on their shoulders through floodwater. Children told those stories like legends, their voices hushed and awed. Parents nodded solemnly, remembering that courage had walked their streets in uniform. Jack Rohr's name was spoken often, though he himself had moved on to other orders. People remembered his steady hand on Delta's side, the way he had listened more than spoken. They said he left the town not with speeches, but with silence that meant more. Rio's discipline, Benji's laughter, Avery's records, Noah's tinkering, each became part of Harbor Haven's foundation. Bo Riggins remained, cane in hand, his sharp eyes watching the river. He often stood by the dock at dusk, muttering that smugglers would always try again. But then he'd nod at the sound of barking from the kennels, satisfied that this time, the town would be ready. Sheriff Donnelly patrolled with her deputies, her promise unbroken, no more cages. And Miriam Cole sent regular reports to state and federal offices, ensuring Harbor Haven had recognition and protection. Bureaucracy, once dreaded, became shield. When the first spring after the storm arrived, the town gathered at Harbor Haven. Lanterns were strung high, music drifted across the dock, and children chased puppies under a sky finally clear. June read a short poem she had written, her voice trembling but strong, about storms, loss, and the dogs who had carried them back to hope. The crowd listened in silence, many wiping tears. At the center of it all lay Delta, her pups tumbling around her. When she raised her head to bark once, sharp and commanding, the sound carried across the water. People cheered, not just for her, but for what she represented, resilience, loyalty, the truth that storms could break houses but not the bond between people and their animals. In the years that followed, Harbor Haven became more than sanctuary. It became a beacon. Other towns sent delegations to learn how to build their own. Newspapers carried stories not of tragedy, but of triumph. Travelers passing through stopped to leave donations, pat a dog, or simply stand and watch hope take form. Maragold Bend would never forget the storm. But neither would it forget what came after, a Marine carrying a broken shepherd into a flooded gym, a town uniting to fight not just floodwaters but cruelty, and a haven rising from ruin. Delta remained there always, her pups grown, her body strong, her gaze steady. To the town she was no longer simply a survivor. She was their guardian, their symbol, their anchor. And when children asked what had saved them, their parents pointed not only to the Marines, or the sheriff, or the volunteers, but to the dog who had been tied to drown, and who instead had led them all to harbor.